Hi, my name is Stephen Kirsting, and once again it is time for the video critique of the monthly theme. And as always, this is the system I'm going to use. First primary consideration is, does it fit the theme? This month's theme was Moody black and white images. The second consideration is artistic and aesthetic considerations. Largely those are going to be personal opinions. And then the last consideration is going to be technical considerations such as camera settings, use of tripod, depth of field composition, those kind of things. The grading system, A means I wish I'd taken that picture. It's portfolio quality stuff. B is I'd be very happy with that picture. C is I probably would not keep the picture. D means it has technical flaws. And F means it does not meet the theme at all. We're going to get started. First image is by Paul, and we have a black and white image of a plant, maybe a flower head, I'm not sure. You see, camera settings wise, we have 200 millimeter lens at f5.6. It's a 55 200 4.56, which means 200/5.6 is wide open. Probably not the sharpest. And 1/250th is close to that rule of thumb shutter speed of 1 over focal length. But the longer the focal length gets, the less that rule of thumb works. And the rule of thumb is really just minimums unless you have VR, something else like that going on. And then we have a little higher ISO, around 500, to allow that to happen. And we could expect possibly some noise, and it's a little grainy back there, but that's not bad at all. I don't know if it was treated or not with noise reduction, but I wouldn't worry about that minor amount of grain. The depth of field, being at 200 millimeters and 5.6, is going to be relatively short, and it looks to me like it's a little further back than I would like. The sharpest area in focus is the back part of the flower head, and I would like it at least in the middle, and perhaps bring this one a little more. It's just a little too out of focus at the front here. Makes that just a little bit distracting. You know, if it wasn't windy and you could get away with a longer shutter speed and could use a tripod, I think I would choose to have more depth of field to kind of get all of this in focus, or at least the front to middle portion. So the sharpest part to me appears to be the back, and I find that just slightly problematic. The image overall looks a little flat to me. The blacks aren't really black. You can see there's a good gap over here in the histogram. And we could set the blacks, hold shift and double click on the word blacks, and it will automatically set the black point right to where it just starts to clip. And that's about where you want blacks to be. Not a big difference, but a noticeable difference. I don't know if it actually helps in this image, because the kind of flatter look is a melancholy feel, and the goal here was moody. This looks to be the original 2:3 aspect for the image, and I think I would probably, yeah, it's the 2:3. I'd probably bring it down 5.7 or so, make it a little more rectangular, and I would probably bring it in just a little tighter. We don't want to get rid of all the black because that's part of what contributes the moodiness, but I think that's about where I would put it. I think that just makes your subject a little larger, a little more focus on it, and we could check and see, Look at that, put it right at the 1/3 intersection. Like I said, I can always find one that works, so I use the grid just to help me align things and stuff for the most part. But I think that's about where I would put it. Considerations with the black and white. This is, like I said, to me it's a bit flat, but gamma and screen brightness are big issues with black and white. Now, we talk a lot about calibrating the monitors for color, but really the biggest variables for most people is going to be their screen brightness and gamma or black scale. And that's why I have this test image up here. You can see mine graduates quite smoothly between from end to end, and I can even see differences in the very dark regions. I don't have banding issues or gamma issues I'm seeing in the image, so that's all worked well. But we always have to consider who's going to be seeing the image and how is it going to be presented when it's a black and white. Because if we were to put this on a white website, it becomes less moody or less dark. If we put it on a black, it becomes more moody or more dark. So we always want to consider those factors. That's why I generally edit it on middle gray screen here, unless I know. So depending upon how it's presented, this might have enough pop. I think the lower contrast works. I think the biggest issue for me is a slight bit of composition, bit of depth of field placement or amount of, and probably the biggest issue is I don't really know what that is. I mean, I know what it is, but it's got to be a plant. It's got to be a part of a flower or something. But I don't connect because I don't really know. So it's just missing a little bit there in subject choice. And maybe that's just because I'm dumb and I don't know what that particular plant is. And maybe it means something more to you and others. So all in all, I would give this image a C+, I think, as it is. Yeah, it's in C+. The idea is in the right direction. Something a little more connectable. If this were like a bolted rose head or the rose hips or something just a little more identifiable, I think would push this up a notch. Okay, next image we have is by Karen. It is a black and white image. I'm not so sure about Moody, but I think we can get there. It's a comic book character, I guess, Comic-Con kind of thing. And let's take a look at the settings. We've got 25mm, used at 1/30th of a second, f6.3. Let's see, 825 on an 18 to 55. I'm guessing somewhere around 4.5 would have been max aperture, and we're at 6.3. So stop down for sharpness and depth of field. With a wide lens, a short focal length, you're going to have more depth of field anyways. And ISO 250 to allow for that 30th of a shutter speed. With a shorter focal lengths, you can get closer to that 1/4 focal length rule of thumb, even sometimes below it, without VR or IS. And using VR or IS can, well, it can hurt or help. All right, let's take a look at the image itself. The depth of field. We've got a lot. We've kept the entire subject in focus, which for this I think is good. It falls off just behind the subject, which is very good placement of the depth of field. But there's still enough back here that we keep all the individual leaves and texture back there, which is actually fine enough that it's not terribly distracting. So I don't have a real problem with that, but maybe even a wider aperture, get a little less depth of field. You're not going to get even half. This part of the leg's not that important. It could have gone out of focus. So I think you're real close to optimal there, but a little longer focal length, at a little wider aperture, I think might have worked better. And if you had a longer lens, 200 millimeter range or so, and you could step back a good distance, you could eliminate a lot of this from the image entirely if you chose to do that. All right, as far as sharpness goes, detail goes, it looks very good. For me, this part here is a bit problematic. I want to see eyes. Obviously they're behind a solid mask, but just giving that hint that they're there and behind the mask gives that same connection as if you could see the eye, or more of that type of connection. And I think that would benefit. With this image, the editing I would do would be to push it towards that comic book HDR gritty kind of process. And I don't know how far we'll get with a black and white. Let me make a duplicate. But I would start pulling the highlights all the way, pushing the shadows all the way, push the clarity all the way, and then we can pull that exposure down some in there. I would look to knock the background quite a bit, so we go down. Let's start with a vignette, see how that works. His head's pretty close to the edge, so that's going to be kind of problematic. See, we could pull that midpoint in, something along that line here. See if we can shift double click on the blacks. I'm not seeing anything. Maybe I'll pull that down anyways. I don't want to lose that eye connection though. Then we could always go in with a brush and do some dodge and burning kind of settings. Knock that background down a little more. Maybe not quite that hard. Somewhere in there, and we could even go with a new brush, and we'll go with a high contrast, restore shadows, and kind of come in here and bring up some of this stuff. Really just drive it into that comic book range. We'll make it more moody and graphic. And I think that's an improvement. I probably need to get that off of his eye. This area. But I think that's getting in towards the direction of what I would do with this image, and I think it's gone a long ways towards being moodier and more comic book-ish. I think if I were to really go with this image, I would probably end up taking into Photoshop and really dealing with some of this background areas a little more if I really wanted to go all out on it. But I think this is pretty nice as it is. So we went from here, as delivered, and with some quick edits we've come over to this kind of an HDR high contrast look, which I think suits this image and subject matter better. And as this image is here, I would put this as a B minus image. And then, you know, we were to look at this on black, and the background's still hurting a little bit, and white's just overpowering. But yeah, I think in the B minus range on this image is where it's at now. Nice job. Right, next image we have is by MJ, and it is definitely a moody black and white. We have a fairly sorrowful looking dog, probably a happy dog, just tired and bored. And let's take a look at the camera settings. We've got a 35mm at f8, so lots of depth of field. We have 1 second exposure, which is way long for a subject that might move, but you know, multiple attempts or whatever, or just a bit of luck. Then ISO 100, trying to keep that optimal image quality thing going. And just looking at the settings, I think there's probably, you know, 35mm at f8, there's going to be a lot of depth of field here, probably a lot more than is necessary. A 35.8 shouldn't need to be at f8 in order to be maximum sharp. And with a black and white, even if it's noisier than a color image, sometimes that adds to the atmosphere. So, you know, I think you could have easily gone to a wider aperture, 5.6, 4.5, somewhere around there. To reduce that shutter speed, you could have gone to a higher ISO. 'Cause I don't think noise, you'd have to go pretty far for ISO to become terribly problematic in a black and white image. And like I said, a lot of times grain in a black and white image just adds to that mood and atmosphere. Okay, looking at this image is going to be one of those ones that it just works a lot better on black. And looking at the image, and by the way, I'm not seeing really any significant gamma issues or banding or any of those other things that we saw on the dark images from last assignment. So that's great. What I'm looking at, to me, is a couple of lost components. I can see a little bit of stuff here that I don't know what it is. It's just in the background. It's like a little there, and we can find it. We can actually do this. We can visualize spots. It's going to show me where all this stuff in the background that I can't really see is. So we can see there's some stuff there that I could just barely make out. And depending upon your screen settings, as far as your gamma accuracy and your screen brightness, you may or may not even see these things. And as a consideration, we could bring this up, exposure, to see what we're looking at back there. And it looks like it's carpet. Okay, not a big deal. But one of those things, depending upon what you plan on doing with this image, you know, if you're going to put it out on the web for everyone to see, then you kind of have to figure there's going to be about a one-stop range in what people are going to be able to see. Some people are going to be seeing this image like this. Some people are going to be seeing this image more like this. So you have to kind of, if you're going to put it out on the web, you have to consider the background it's going to be on, and just right click, find the background. Where's the background? done. Bring this back up so I can find the background and fix it. Medium gray. I look at medium gray, look at the exposure, 1 over, 1 under, and see what kind of things you see there as far as possible distractions. Alright. Because depending upon how you're seeing it, how someone else is going to see it, I'm going to put it back at the 0 adjustment. And a couple things that I notice for me viewing it here primarily is I've got a little bit of an ear here floating, disconnected. I would like to have a little more connection in there so it ties together. And the same with this paw. I would like to have just a little more tying it to the dog as part of the leg, or remove it. Remove those aspects. Now, the problem with removing those aspects for me are it starts to become a head floating in black. So I'd prefer to see these hints, but just a little more tying it in. And we could try to bring some of that up. That's not going to work. Probably an adjustment brush, we can try that. Be really, let's fix all those settings, bring the shadows up. Let's try, see if I can get anything out of that. Not really. I can do exposure. I think you would do better than I can in the original. And after having done that, I'd take another brush and we'll knock out some of these things that I brought back in. I'd get rid of that back there. I'd probably get rid of this right at the edge. So I'm just kind of fading that out. Make sure we get rid of that stuff that's back there. And I think that works just a bit better. Just a touch better. All in all, blacks, plenty of black clipping. I wouldn't worry about it. And let's take a look at sharpness and noise up close. Not as sharp as I would have expected, and it would not surprise me. It looks like the dog might have been in just having blinked or about to blink or something, because just in the eye and in the forehead here we've lost, it looks like motion blur, just a hint of motion blur to me, and that 1 second is gonna do that. As far as everything else, it's sharp back there, it's sharp up here, so I do think that's a little bit of motion blur, and it doesn't surprise me at all. Alright, all in all, I give this image a B. I give this image a B. I'd probably tone down the highlights. Ooh, it's calling a lot more highlights than I thought it would. We can go do that with tone curve, because we can find a section and it's saying highlights, which is that region. You can pull that down with this. You notice I get 4 adjustments here as opposed to 3. I guess I get 4. but I get more control over them in the tone curve. So I can pull the highlights down. It's not affecting the rest of the dog as much, and I can actually tweak which part is considered highlight. So now all my adjustments are really focused over in this edge. And I think something like that. Just bring it so the contrast isn't quite as high for that small amount of white that you have in such a dark image. So I just bring that down a bit. But all in all, I give that image a B. Nice job, MJ. Here we have a second image by MJ, and it is a black and white image. Definitely kind of a spooky, moody image. And we have camera settings of 34 millimeters at f11. A lot of depth of field, multiple subjects, short working distance. Looks like a very good choice. 1/125th, plenty of shutter speed, and an ISO of 200. And I think you could have gotten away with 100. Not that I expect it to matter at all. And looking at the image, 200 didn't matter. Just wasn't necessary. We got sharpness, perhaps a little bit of noise here. It could be texture of the fish either way, and that's why I said in black and white noise doesn't necessarily detract quite as much as it does in color, but that may not have been there with ISO 100. Sharpness, we've got plenty of sharpness. Everything, I don't see any issues whatsoever with camera settings or anything, so good job there. Image wise, I like the composition. This fish here, just out of the depth of field and not quite part of the group, doesn't work as much. If he wasn't there, I'd want a tighter composition. And this stripe of sky, I don't know really helps. It looks to me this is in a 5:7 or 8:10 ratio. Is it really a 3:2? It's not. So it's somewhere in between. It looks like, I don't know what it is. Not that it really matters, just if you stick to some of the standards, framing is going to be easier. I would go somewhere around a 5:7, pull this down, just get rid of that horizon line, leave enough of the ocean that we know what it is, and then take our strongest subject, put it right around that 1/3 point, somewhere in that area. See where we've landed. Dead nuts on. And that's about what I would do with the composition. Exposure wise, I think it's a little grittier than it needs to be. A little higher contrast than I would think. I think I'd want less contrast, maybe slightly less exposure. I think that works just a little bit better. As far as being moody, I might bring up the shadows just so we don't have quite as hard a contrast in this area. And if your screen brightness was higher, you know, this may look different to you on your monitor than it does on mine. But I think somewhere around there is what I would do with it. Not a far shift from where it started, just minor refinements. Yeah, just minor refinements. I hit the back key. That's where we started. Well, no, it's not, because there's a sky. That's where we started. That's where we ended. As far as an image goes, you know, if it was supporting a story about environmental decline or carelessness of people and those kind of things, I think it's a good, strong image. I would give this a B image. I don't know that it's something that I would put on my wall or put in my portfolio due to the subject matter and stuff, but as far as that goes, as it sits, solid B on this image. Nice job. F. The assignment was black and white Moody images. Let me fix that for you, numbnuts. There, C. Alright, fail. Next image we have by Heather, and it was titled Where My Anger Hides, I believe. It's a black and white. Maybe a little bright for me to be Moody. It has an HDR kind of feel to it. And let's take a look at camera settings. 55mm, f9, stop down for sharpness, ISO's low, enough shutter speed for that focal length. So I don't see an issue with any of those settings. I don't expect to see any issue in the image for it. A lot of sharpness in the eye. Over pushed the sharpness there. You can see the grain coming out in the eyes, and I'm 99% certain that wasn't there. So overall, this, you can see the eyes just, they stand out too much, you know. So unless you were going for scary creature kind of thing, which I guess you could be if you had an angry kid, kind of the same thing, right? But in general, I would say that that's too far of a push on the eyes, and in a lot of ways the image overall for me. We go back, see if we can pull the highlights down. We're looking in the 250 range or so in there, 245. See if we can pull that highlights down. Make that just a little less overwhelming. I would probably get rid of a few of these screws in the background. They don't really serve a purpose, and they're little points of brightness that don't really serve a purpose. They're easy to get rid of. This one I don't know if I would mess with. It's close enough to the handle, which is already a distraction, that it's not really, I don't want to say distraction, it's already a feature in the image, so it's not pulling the eye away from the central focus like these ones out here in the periphery did a little bit. All right, and I might consider putting a vignette on this image. I'm using vignettes a lot more in this series than I normally would, to be honest with you. But I think a lot of times it works to isolate the subject. Let's see what that did as far as the highlights go. I don't think it should have hurt them. No. So just kind of brought it in a little more central, maybe a little heavy. Don't know that it was necessary. A little better with some minor adjustments. See what happens if we pull Shadows down. Nah, leave those alone. Maybe an adjustment brush here. That's too far. I want to bring those eyes down just a bit. That might be enough. This is going to be tough to do. Bring those down just a touch. Maybe bring up the shadows. Even them out a bit. Kind of trying to bring them back in line with where I kind of feel they should be. So we started out there, a little bit of recovery, add a vignette, remove a couple little minor distractions around the image, and we end up there, which I think is a little more where you want to end up. And when you're first starting out, and I still do it to this day, I tend to over edit initially. That's one of the nice things about Lightroom. You can always go back and retune the image without anything being destructive, and you can always create a virtual copy before you get started by hitting Command Control Quote, and create a virtual copy so that you always have your original set safely to the side, and you can always come back and look at it again with fresh eyes and fine-tune your edits. As an image goes here, I would put this as a C+. For me, I don't know, it still feels a little HDR. I understand the idea, and you want the moodiness out of it, and I think it's there. I think this handle maybe needs to go. I definitely don't think that Lightroom is the place to deal with that. See what it picks. A head. We don't want a head. I'm not going to find a good answer for this, I don't think. Yeah, Lightroom is not the place to do this. Not with that large and tough of an area. But I think it works better without the handle. So that's justifies a trip over to Photoshop, and then some cloning, selection and cloning. And I think that works even a little better that way. And that's a tough one. If this is the door you have and this is the scene as it was, do you take it knowing you're going to have to make those edits? Do you take the handle off the door and leave some screw holes there that you'll have to edit? I don't have the right answer, but I think it works better without the handle in the image. And like I said, I think we've gotten this image to a B level. I think we were in a C to maybe even close to a D due to processing, a little heavy in my opinion, to where we're in that B range now, and it's worth making the effort on this image. So I would say take the time and kind of look at re-editing it closer towards this. All right. Next image we have is by Steve. Screen capture off of Flickr. Fuji S1500. which is a bridge camera. It was taken at 28.7 millimeter. I don't know if that's effective or actual. At f3.4, 1/200th shutter speed, ISO 100. Okay, low ISO. I don't really think that that's going to matter with this image. f3.4 is almost certainly wide open, so it's not going to be terribly sharp, I would not expect. And it's a smaller image because it's a screen capture. That's the size it was put up, so I can't zoom in real hard for details. But it doesn't look incredibly sharp anywhere. But all in all, it doesn't matter. This image tells a story. It does to me. You know, we always say an image tells a story. Well, it doesn't. An image either supports a story that you're telling in text or something like that, or I create a story. And to me, this is an abandoned, sad, lonely swing in a bleak environment, cold winter. So it's either, you know, it's foggy, so it's crappy weather. It's buried in snow. It's cold. It's not playground weather, and it's got that kind of bleak context to it that says that for me. Exposure-wise, you know, we're not these whites are, they're probably in the 230 range, I'm guessing. Oh no, they're down. They're right around 200. So they're well below clipping. I don't know if they were pulled down, but it's a sense of fog, so I don't have a problem with that. This area there, just a little bit of black clipping, right about what you want to see normally. Just getting to the blacks. So processing exposure wise, I don't have a problem with it. Depends on if you want it to be sad, like, you know, a story of abandonment, the harder contrast. If you want it to be more melancholy, then lower contrast might work better. But either way, I think the image works well. So this image, I give it a B-, I think. I think I'm going to B- on this one. I would probably prefer more focus here, sharpness, and maybe a little more detail. In doing so, bring that detail up, and then we can bring the contrast up. Ooh, I don't like what that did with the background, but I like what it did for the subject portion. So here, that would probably be better done in Lightroom. Sorry, Photoshop. But I could probably come in here and just bring up the shadows. Bring up the shadows quite a bit, and the contrast a bit, and carefully paint that in. Actually, what I'm going to do, create as big a brush as I can. Take the feather off of it. Make sure auto masking is selected. Make this brush as big as I can. Trying to make sure it covers as much of the black as possible. Click once. You can see anywhere that brush fell, it's selected. Same tonalities. So anywhere, wherever I picked, it picked the same tonalities and masked them in throughout the image. Anything that was not in that same tonality tolerance range, it ignored. And then I can easily go in here with an eraser and take it out of areas that I did not want it to lift the shadows up. If there's areas of effect that I found problematic. See what that looks like now. Just bump up the flow of my eraser, get rid of that stuff. I actually think I liked it better with the effect, but the point is, it's removable. It's easy to select a lot of the area you want all at once. Using that trick of making the brush really large and clicking once, and then removing the few errant places that it landed. But I actually think I liked it better with those areas affected. I might even push that a little further. Alright, all in all, like I said, this is a B image for me because it tells a story. That's the key. And a few minor technical issues matter much less. Alright, next image. We have an image by Ian. And this was called Pain. And we have prescription medicine. Let's see what we got here. All right, there's a Pentax K200D, 35mm f8, 0.8 of a second, so almost a full second exposure at 100 ISO. Okay. I'm guessing a tripod was used. Almost a second hand, just holding your hand steady, at least for me, for a second is pushing things. But other than that, I don't really see an issue. I don't know that absolute minimum ISO was necessary. Looks reasonably sharp. The printing on there is probably not a lot sharper than that. This appears to be the sharpest pill back here. This area appears to be the sharpest skin texture. That one's just a little bit out of focus, and it's actually the one you want in focus because it's got the numbers. At least I kind of feel like that should be the one that's in focus. But minor there. I think, I don't know, for me this isn't the best of the series. I know it's a hand, but I think I know it's a hand more so because I saw the other images of the series. You can certainly figure out it was a hand, but it's not obvious it's a hand. It's a little too close in that aspect. Moody, it's a high contrast. But as far as the story goes that it's trying to convey, this image falls short for me. There's not enough context. The hand's not obvious enough that it's a hand, and yeah, not enough context, not enough connection. So for me, I think this image is C. I don't really see any technical issues as such, but there's better images in the series than this one. Okay, as far as developing this goes, I don't really have any issues with the way it's exposed. Black, whites, probably quite a bit of clipping, and there is. That might be more than you really want, especially if this were to go out for print. But if we take it over to soft proofing it, it's probably not as significant. Go to the screen, clipping under sRGB. This is what it looks like on the screen. You see nothing's clipping under the screen. Goes. If I pick a paper or something else like that, it's going to be an entirely different story. So for display on screen, this is fine, no issues. But still a C. All right, and the second image from Ian, and this one is closer for telling the story. I feel it's a little tight. Same settings, so I didn't write them out as the previous image. Depth of field is going to be a little better. I guess that's as big as this one's getting. No. Yes. Alright. Depth of field is going to be a little better because it's a little looser composition, a little farther away, and that has allowed these pills to stand out with their labeling and stuff. Depth of field's adequate enough to include some text on the bottle. It says distilled, so I know we're talking alcohol and that this is a drink glass. But for me, it's tighter than I want. I would want this looser yet. I'd probably want something that said vodka or tequila or something like that, as opposed to distilled. I'd like to see more of the glass, more of the bottle, more of the whole story. And this is probably a contradiction to what I usually say. I normally say, focus in on the subject. And the subject is, in the story, is pain medication. But in this image, the subject is dealing with pain by taking medications and alcohol. So the subject is not the pills, the subject's the pain and dealing with pain. And in that aspect, all of the components are the subject in this image. So for this image, I think looser. Exposure wise, maybe a little dark down here in the corner. We could probably go with higher contrast. Maybe a little lighter on the highlights. Make it just a little flatter. Looks a little, well, I can't zoom in. Looks like it might be a little grainy back there. That could easily be the bottle itself. This image, I think, is in the B range, C plus B range. I think a looser composition can move this into B range. And my favorite image out of this series was the one where you had the two pills in one hand and the prescription bottle and other pills on the table. And I think if that one had the alcohol in it as well, it would kind of tie it all together because it adds that human element into it that this one's just missing. There's no person. So my favorite was one you didn't include for submission. This is a close second. Nice job. And what I really like about this series is that it has an idea behind it, a story to tell, and you did it. Nice. What do we have here? 3 images. Maybe I goofed up. Maybe one of those wasn't submitted, or either way. Alright, shouldn't have 3. Real quick, this image to me is in the B range. You need to recover that if it's recoverable. Bring up some of the shadows in there. Go with a flatter image. And maybe add a vignette, tone down the sides over there. That's a bit heavy. Maybe something along those lines will cover those highlights. But it's ad images pushing in the B range for me. And I think the thing that makes this image different than the other plant images, I know what this is. I know it's milkweed. I know the milkweed strands. I can kind of see them blowing and more context of the plant in its setting. So there's just more connection with the plant as far as what it is for me. So that's the main difference between this plant image and the other plant image we saw earlier. And it looks like that's our last image for this month's submissions. And I guess, for good or bad, having fewer submissions allows me to ramble on and go into a little more detail and edits on the images. And I hope you have found that useful and not overly tiring. So until next time, when I'll see you again, have a great day.